the CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you're serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. Welcome back, everyone, to the 5th episode of the CoCo Crew. This is John Linville.
And Neil Blanchard.
And we are the CoCo Crew. And we are here talking about the CoCos again. CoCo Fest is just about 6 months away, and this time it really is 6 months.
Seems like the 6 month is continuous. This keeps going.
Well, I think it's going to count down from now. Anyway, it's an exciting time. Definitely starting to feel a bit more in the groove. It's holidays coming up. A little extra time, hopefully, to work on some CoCo stuff. Winter will be here. Have nothing better to do but stay inside and hack and do cool things. And like I said, CoCo Fest will be here before you know it. I assume you're planning to go to CoCo Fest this year, Neil?
Oh, definitely.
I hope all of our listeners will come to CoCo Fest this year. I hope we swamp the place. That would be awesome. Yeah, Neil and I were actually talking about maybe we should show up a day early and maybe hang out and do some other stuff. I don't know if we're going to do that or not, but that would make a long trip a little more enjoyable overall. Not that CoCo Fest isn't good enough by itself. It's great stuff. But
just extend the trip a little bit. That's all.
Extending the trip, that might be fun. I know last year on the way to CoCo Fest, I stopped in. Where did I stop?
Was it the Barcade?
I stopped at the Barcade. That was in Ohio. Let's see, what city is that in? 16-bit bar and arcade. I think it's Columbus. So anyway, it's always good to have to take a long trip and do a few other things with it. And so stopping at barcades along the way or getting there a little early and staying a little late for some sightseeing in the Chicago area, or just hanging out for some CoCo geek time. CoCo Fest is a great excuse for all of those things. Like I said, 6 months away. It's a good motivator to do that CoCo project you've been thinking about. Anyway, I hope everyone will show up and come along to CoCo Fest this year, and let's blow the doors out of the place. What do you think?
Definitely. I'd like to see a hackathon, too.
A hackathon. Well, that would be cool. Hackathons sometimes need a little inspiration. Maybe we'll have to think of what people need to hack on. Great when people show up and just hack on whatever, but sometimes people get there and then they can't think of what to do and they go have beer instead, which is okay too.
I guess as long as everybody's having a good time.
Anyway, let's expand this first part of the show a little bit more than usual. And we'll talk about maybe some recent eBay acquisitions. Neil, have you gotten anything interesting lately?
I picked up a couple CoCos.
Yeah.
I just can't say no to the ones that say untested, and because usually they do work.
Yeah, definitely.
Recently picked up a CoCo 1 and a CoCo 3.
Oh, yeah? How much was your CoCo 3?
$30.
$30. Oh, yeah. Wow. So I'm not sure that's the myth of the $300 standard price for the CoCo 3. I'm not sure it's holding up very well. I also, since the last show, I acquired a CoCo 3 on eBay. So it was a 128K CoCo 3, as is not tested. Got it for, mine was a little more, $100, $88. But showed up. I think that's the one I got that had not been opened. Still had the sticker on the bottom, but I had to open it anyway because it was rattling on the inside. And it turns out, I guess somebody had dropped something on it because it had broken off a piece of plastic inside the case. A little super glue took care of that, and like I said, it worked fine, booted right up, no problems.
Probably put a 512K expansion board in there while it was open, I'm sure, eh?
Well, I haven't yet, but I probably will. My stable of CoCo machines is large. I don't always max them all out immediately. One other thing I got that I thought was kind of interesting is a book, which was actually in Poland, but the book is in English. It's called Spreadsheeting on the TRS-80 Color Computer by Harry Anbarlian. Anyway, it's actually, I got it right here. It's kind of neat. It's a book on using spreadsheets, and it is based on Spectaculator and running on the color computer. Now, I had no idea such a book even existed. Apparently, this guy wrote a number of similar books for spreadsheeting applications across a number of contemporary computers. Probably not a book for just anyone, but for the avid collector like myself, I thought it was a pretty nice pickup.
How did you find that book?
I just stumbled across it on eBay. I spend a lot of time kind of looking through the eBay auctions just as a hobby. It's kind of interesting to look and see what's for sale or whatever. As you've noted before, I've picked up a number of oddball books here and there. Several of them are CoCo and some of them are not. But I like old computer books. They have kind of a historical edge to them, and sometimes they cover topics that, it's just a little hard to find a book on these days. I have a number of old text-like books on computer graphics from 1985 or whatever.
It's a good resource.
Yeah, well, they're cool to have. Like I said, it's kind of you get a historical perspective. Sometimes you learn something new because the stuff is broken down in a simple way, because everything was simpler back then. So even the complex topics are somewhat simpler. Anyway, so those are my interesting items. So kind of, again, extending this intro a little bit more than what we usually do. I thought maybe we'd also just talk about recent or current projects. Recently, I have been kind of allotted a little space in my, let's be generous and call it a lab, set up. So I got a CoCo, I can swap out either CoCo 2 or CoCo 3, and I have a floppy drive set up and a multi-pack, and then I've got, in case I need more than one thing to run a program, I've got a working cassette drive hooked up, and then I also have an old netbook style laptop set up running a DriveWire. And so now I've been able to go through some of my stockpile of old software and old tapes, old diskettes, and test a few things out, see what I've actually got, see what actually works. And been doing that and experimenting, running some stuff. Like I said, I've got DriveWire in there, which I've used DriveWire off and on basically since it was created, but I've never been a very serious DriveWire user. And so this is kind of the first time I've really done much with DriveWire 4 as the server. And so I had to learn a few things about the HDB DOS translation, how to have DriveWire running and accessing a physical floppy at the same time for copying back and forth, that sort of thing. So I've been doing some stuff there that, probably any self-respecting CoCo person should have been doing the whole time. But, I've always focused a bit more on either writing my own code or running the program packs and that sort of thing. So this is a little bit of a new focus for me. How about you? What have you been working on recently?
I've actually been hacking around with the Cloud9 Flashpack,
Oh yeah.
messing around with that.
Yeah, I've been doing that too. I'd made a couple of the programs, the Follow Coco and CoCoDoku available for Mark to release to Flashpack buyers, and turns out that there was a little bit of an incompatibility with the software used to program the flashes and the images that I had given him. Was kind of working that out, trying to figure out if there was a way to either to fix the software or to fix the images. It turns out I think we're going to have to just ship a different set of images because they need to be padded out to a 128 byte size or a size divisible by 128 bytes because of the way the software is written, which is fine, but just needs to be done. And then there's another issue if you try to warm reset into CoCoDoku, it doesn't restart correctly, and still haven't quite figured that one out. And I don't know if that's a software problem or if there's something weird about the way the hardware is starting up there or what. But anyway, so I was playing with some of that as well. Haven't quite figured all of it out. How about you? You weren't programming in a Farfall ROM image to the flashback, were you? Of course, I know you've got the one of the highly coveted Farfall cartridges, but I think you said you were trying to save it from being scuffed up.
Figured it was a good use for the flashback.
If you just insert it once carefully and then never remove it, it won't get scuffed up.
Where it stays and slot one of them back.
Oh, Lord. Okay, so here's our announcements. You said we are the CoCo Crew Podcast. We're available on Twitter at CoCo Crew Podcast. We are also available on Facebook. We have a page. The title of the page is the CoCo Crew Podcast. I'm sure if you search, you'll be able to find it with no problem. The podcast is available on iTunes, and it is available for streaming through Stitcher. I think I saw we had maybe 3 people streaming through Stitcher now. So
that number's getting up there.
We're starting to get up a little bit higher. I think Stitcher may be a little overbilled in the media, but if people want to use it, it's no skin off my nose. We are hosted at Cyber Ears. I'm just checking right now. Looks like the last episode 4, the statistics of Cyber Ears are telling me that there are 325 downloads through Cyber Ears. That includes people going through iTunes as well. So that's not bad. We have over 300 active people going and getting our stuff, plus the, like I said, 3 or 4 people at Stitcher. So the show's been looking up. Oh, you know what? This month's total active listeners at Stitcher, 4. So it's not 3, it's 4. So that's what, a 33% increase.
We're on the right track.
Let's see. So moving on our announcements. If you want to reach us, we have some email addresses. So you can reach us as show@cococrew.org, podcast@cococrew.org, or feedback@cococrew.org. All 3 of those will reach both Neil and I together. And if for some reason you prefer to reach just one of us, as many of you seem to prefer, I'm available as john@cococrew.org, and Neil is available, of course, as neil@cococrew.org. So anyway, that's our standing announcements. Now we can move on to some news.
Well, good afternoon. And my name's Tony Pedraza, and I am the host of the 18th annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. We call it the last in quotes because we really don't know if we're going to have another one. And we haven't known every year for the past 17 years.
Okay, well, let's talk about some news. Our first item is the VCC, the Virtual Color Computer Emulator source that we've talked about in previous months about it being relicensed and released as an open source project. It has been it's been released at version 2.0.1b. That's an announcement coming from Bill Pierce. I'm not sure that there are actually any meaningful differences yet I think a lot of these little releases that they've been having are basically just source rebuilds and maybe a minor reorganization stuff. But if you are a fan of VCC, you probably want to check it out and make sure that you are up to date. The next item relates to the CoCo 3 FPGA project. Of course, that project is from Gary Becker, and it's a project to implement, originally to implement a CoCo 3, and now it's more like something beyond a CoCo 3 in or on an FPGA, specifically targeted at a few boards, and the main board is the Altera DE1. CoCo 3 FPGA has now reached a version 3.0 release. Of course, then within a day or two of 3.0 being released, someone complained that Dungeons & Daggerath was not working, and as we all know as dedicated CoCo fans, that is an important piece of software to have working. So Gary quickly released a fix and then released a version 3.0.0.1. And so anyway, so that's good that Gary's being responsive to bug reports. And then there was a kind of a long and protracted discussion of whether or not the project should be renamed to, any number of other names. So it's the original idea was that it's more than a CoCo 3. Maybe we should call it a CoCo 4. And then it's like, are you sure you want to call it a CoCo 4? Maybe we should call it CoCo 3 something else, or we should call it CoCo X, which was the name of the project that Gary had on Kickstarter. And there were a bunch of names proposed. They had a little poll. I think the names that came out on top were either keep it as CoCo 3 FPGA or switch it to CoCo X. I think the main thing is that it's Gary's project. Maybe Gary should get to name it. And I haven't heard any response really from Gary on the naming thing. So as far as I know, it's going to continue to be called the CoCo 3 FPGA, at least until someone else tells me different. But anyway, I think the biggest thing with the version 3.0 release is that Gary now actually has released a full complement of source. Previously, just before that, he had released, I think, most of the source, but maybe not quite enough to compile everything. But I believe at this point he has released enough of the source to compile the entire thing. And I've seen some other people trying to do some more project extensions and maybe go off in their own direction some, which is, both a beauty and a hazard of open source, is that people could sometimes split off and work on different things. But anyway, it's good. I think it's a healthy sign of the project, and it's good that Gary is releasing that source to the community, if nothing else for, prolonging the project in the future. And if we ever do face a future where you can't actually get original color computer hardware, it's good that source is available so people can do with it what they need to. Neil, you said, I think you said you have not yet acquired a DE1.
No, I haven't. I really want to get in. I got to jump in.
Yeah, I did get one. I managed to get one with the older SRAM, which is the SRAM that actually can go up to a 25 megahertz clock speed. I worked through Brian Holman's write-up, found a little piece that I considered to be missing, and let him know that there was a step that I had to add to his steps to get mine working. But I did get it working, booted it up. You could, type in basic commands or whatever, and then kind of turned it off and haven't done anything else with it yet. But the DE1 boards are available. You can get them on eBay, not much more than $100 used. That's pretty cheap. $100 is definitely within my hell, just buy it kind of range. So
you were also saying to look out for the ones with the pink anti-static bags, ones usually indicating the SRAM.
Well, that's what I thought. That's still sort of my theory, is that those are the older boards, and so would therefore be likely to have the older SRAM. For what it's worth, the one I got I bought one that they were selling more than one in the same auction. And the picture had a pink foam insert, but what I got had a black foam insert, but it still had the older SRAM. So your mileage may vary. Somewhere along the production line of the DE1, they changed one part to a slightly different part and has some different timings that I guess Gary's source code is using the SRAM in a way that limits how fast it can go with the new part. And apparently there's some tricks that other projects have been able to use to get around that, and they're using the SRAM somewhat differently than what Gary's doing, and so far those tricks haven't worked for him. So anyway, people are buying the ones with the newer SRAM and actually getting them modified with the older parts. That's a kind of a hairy job if you're not big into soldering, but because it's a surface mount part.
Yeah, that's tough.
But it is possible, and there are people in the community that are volunteering to help with that. If you're interested in that, I'll just have to refer you to the Yahoo group and the mailing list for the CoCo 3 FPGA. Big news in CoCo 3 FPGA. The progress has kind of matured quickly or recently, and are interested, you should probably check it out. Here's one that's a little lighter. Vincent Tran posted on Facebook that that Tandy Radio Shack had been a clue on Jeopardy. For anyone listening from outside of North America, they probably have heard of Jeopardy, but maybe not. Jeopardy is a game show, kind of a quiz style game show in the United States, and I guess Canada probably sees it too. I know Alex Trebek is the host, and he's Canadian, so I assume his countrymen are aware of his efforts. Anyway, Jeopardy is a twist in that they offer you the answer, and then you're supposed to give them the question or give them the answer as it is in the form of a question. So the clue. Unveiled in 1977, the TRS-80 got its name from the Tandy Corporation and this retail chain where it was sold. And so it doesn't say here, but I assume the answer is, what is Radio Shack? So, and of course, for those that may not know or may be interested where the 80 part of TRS-80 came from, the CPU on the original TRS-80, the Model 1, and also on basically all the non-color computer TRS-80s, or at least all the TRS-80 one that had a model like Model 1, Model 2, Model 3, Model 4, Model 12, Model 16, Model 6000. Those all, the processor was a Z80. So TRS-80 is Tandy Radio Shack 80. There's Tandy Radio Shack Z80 is what they stand for. So just a goofy little aside, but at least, we get a little respect on Jeopardy. So the next item is an announcement from Neil Crook that he has Nitrous 9 running on the multi-comp, which you see this reference to the multi-comp from time to time. I kind of dislike it because it's one of those things where people use a name that sort of sounds generic, but they use it in a way that obviously is referencing something very specific. And so in this case, they're talking about a kind of retro-oriented computer project that's out there. I'm not even sure, does multi-comp relate to the N8VEM project, or is that something completely different? Anyway, there's a retro-oriented computer project out there that has a computer with multiple CPU options, one of which is a 6809. A few people talk about it on the list because of that 6809 connection. And apparently Neil Crook has gotten the Nitrous 9 operating system ported over to the multi-comp with its 6809 configuration and running. So if you're a Nitrous 9 user and you're looking for other computers to run Nitrous 9 on, if that's the kind of thing that sounds appealing to you, well, you can do it on the multi-comp now. So I'll refer you to Neil Crook for further details, and I assume he is available on the CoCo mailing list. Okay, I have to be careful when I say this next one. All right, I'm going to refer to this as Brain Bleep, okay? Brain Bleep is spelled BRAINF, and it ends in a CK. But I'm going to say Brain Bleep. Brain Bleep is a computer language that somebody implemented probably as a test of skill or whatever, and then they named it somewhat vulgarly, probably based on how you feel after you've tried to program in it, because it is very terse. It only has like 7 or 8 instructions, and you have to, and not only does it only have 7 or 8 instructions, but the mnemonics are basically punctuation characters. Our own Boise Pete has implemented an interpreter for Brain Bleep that runs under Nitrous 9. He's made it available in the Nitrous 9 repository. So if you are if you view yourself as a hacker extraordinaire, if you're looking for a way to exercise your hacker muscles on the CoCo using an obscure programming language of questionable usefulness, then Mr. Pete has made something available for you to use as a scratching post. I haven't had a chance to try it out yet. I hope to hear some people using it. So if you want to bleep your brain, then go try the Brain Bleep interpreter.
And feel free to fill in whatever you want to fill in for the word bleep.
Yeah. Hopefully everyone knows what I'm talking about, what the bleep I'm talking about. Okay, moving on. Mr. Ed Snyder posted some photos on Facebook of his color computer kit.
This was cool. I was kind of drooling over this posting.
So for those that aren't aware, back in the day, as some people like to say, it was possible to get a version of the Color Computer 2 that came in a kit form, and so it had the case, and individual electronic components, switches and resistors and transistors and capacitors, and of course the individual chips, an instruction manual, whatever. And so you'd assemble it yourself. And once in a while, I've seen these show up on eBay, not too often. And this is probably this kit. He said he got it a couple of years ago. That's probably the last one I saw on eBay. If you ever see one and you like building or constructing electronic circuits, spending a lot of time over a hot soldering iron, this is your project. It's pretty neat. I don't know what the origin of this was. I don't know if it was once they had introduced the Color Computer 3, maybe at some point they decided they had too many Color Computer 2 parts laying around, and if they could just save some labor costs by just throwing the parts in a box and selling it to individuals, or what.
Yeah, I thought maybe Tandy just got lazy.
I don't know, and I'm not sure. Maybe Boise could give us a history on this. He might know. Maybe this was sold as an educational option. Assembling your own computer was sort of a thing in the middle to late 70s. By the time the Color Computer 2 was out, that's 83. There weren't a lot of people actually building their own computers, at least not at the solder it together kind of level. By then, building a computer basically meant buying a motherboard for a PC and buying a video card and a hard drive controller and stuffing them in a slot. The history of this is a little bit unknown to me. It's a neat thing. I'd like to have one if I ever see another one pop up. But anyway, it's neat. The pictures are out there. Feel free to take a look. Anyway, a project we've talked about before, the RGB to VGA boards is it's essentially a scan doubler sort of circuit that will take the output from a CoCo 3 RGB port and transform it to where it can be displayed on a modern VGA video display. This project's still sort of maturing a bit, but they're available out there. And but what you end up with is circuit boards stacked up, and a lot of people would want a case for that. And so John Strong, who had previously designed a 3D printed plastic case for the CoCo SDC cards, has come through with a design for a plastic case for the RGB to VGA boards. And so he's made those available. He's got some pictures. I think you can get them in different colors.
They look good. Turned out nice.
Yeah, it looks pretty nice. John's pretty conscientious. He got the 3D printer a while back, and he's kind of really taken to the hobby, and designs his boxes and makes them available. And I don't know if he's printing these to order or what. But yeah, so it looks like he's got at least white and black and yellow and red. And it says 4 case colors available for a limited time. So it sounds like that's the ones he's making it in. Maybe that's because those are the spools of filament he's got for his 3D printer. Anyway, if you're looking for a case for your RGB to VGA, contact Mr. Strong. Okay, the next project is a little bit interesting, and it's not done yet, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's from Ed Snyder, and let's see, he's calling it the MC6847 VGA, and then in parentheses FPGA project. And so basically what he has is a board that plugs in place of the 6847, that's the VDG and a CoCo 1 or 2. And I think you plug the 6847 then into this board, but alongside it, it's got an FPGA and some other chips involved here, and I don't know what they all are. And a div switch and another port for video out. But yeah, so the point is that you could then interface a CoCo 1 or 2 or any other machine that uses a 6847. You could interface that to a VGA monitor. So Ed's made some pictures available, both of the prototype that he has and some of his layout materials. It's kind of a cool little board. It's like I said, I think it's not really. I think this is just a prototype, so he probably will be doing another spin of this board before it's actually available for sale. But it's a neat project on the way from Ed that you may want to be aware of. The next item, so Kip Kuhn is someone in the community that's been around a few years now. Kip showed up for CoCo Fest for the first time this past year, and as part of his effort to fund his way there, he announced that he was selling a single board computer design around the 6809. And unfortunately, he's had a little snags with the design. They were having some problems getting the clocking working correctly with the CPU and whatnot. Anyway, recently Kip posted an update on his current debugging. Sounds like, so it says, I found a grave wiring error pertaining to the barrel connector on the Kipper SBC V1 PCB. You guessed it, I wired the barrel connector / DC jack backwards. Ouch. So I guess it's not hard to see why why they had some problems with that board if the power was the wrong polarity.
Yeah, that'll take care of it in a hurry.
Yeah, that's not too good for the chips.
No.
And we're not laughing at Kip. We're just kind of chuckling over the humor in life situations, I guess. Anyway, if you're wondering what happened to the Kipper SBC, it's still in progress. Kip says he's still working on it. Like I said, he did post an update. So there you go. If you need to reach Kip, I'm sure you can find him on the mailing list. Okay, the next item is something that is from someone named Chad Hendon. I don't know a lot about Chad, but he does have a website. Anyway, it says a multi-ROM bank builder tool. I said, well, so what is that? And so the original announcement was that he had released a tool to help you put together images for burning a large EEPROM based out of smaller EEPROM or smaller ROM images. It's like, well, okay, but why do you want to do that? Well, so it turns out he's actually working on something called the Super CoCo EEPROM 512K project. And he is basically working on a multi-pack style of device. I don't have all the details here, but he's working on some sort of multi-pack. You're going to be able to control it with looks like he's going to have push buttons and some sort of LCD display on it, and pretty neat stuff if you're into having a multi-pack for your CoCo. If nothing else, if you're interested in that sort of thing, you want to keep up with the post from Chad, and we'll have a link, of course, in the show notes for his website. You can go and check out all the things he's up to. It's pretty neat. it's, like I say, it's going to be a way to have multiple ROM images at your fingertips. And I know Neil and I go back and forth, or he likes the floppy disk based stuff, whereas I like the cartridge based stuff. So maybe this is more my style of project. But anyway, it's cool stuff. Cool way to have more ROM based software available at your fingertips without having to have a stash of ROM cartridges laying around.
Yeah, that could be very handy.
Okay, so William Assel, he is the author of something called LW Tools, which is a cross-assembly software development package for the 6809, particularly for the CoCo. And so he announced a release version 4.12. So it has a number of improvements overall, including better detection of error situations like byte overflows, bad register lists for push-pull, cycle count reports, and some macro ADC compatibility. Some of the fix-ups for error detection will break code that seemed to be working fine before. That it was working is purely accidental. So anyway, so the net of it is there's an LW Tools update. If you're using LW Tools for developing CoCo software, you'd probably be interested. And there might be there's a chance that your code might break, but it's because you're doing something funny to begin with.
If you want to meet William, he's at CoCo Fest every year.
He does come to CoCo Fest every year. I think he drives from the North Pole or something to get there.
He really does. Yeah, he's Canadian.
Definitely. But yeah, he's a nice fellow. Got a bushy mustache. You know, what else can you ask for? William, we love you. Let's see. The next item is another meeting of the Danish CoCo Society, which is probably just two fellows. It's Fedor Steeman. Is that pronunciation correct or close enough? I hope. Anyway, Fedor, if I'm saying your name wrong, let me know. And Fedor and Simon are from Denmark there. So the guys are getting together in Denmark and doing some CoCo time in person. So, Simon Jonasson, of course, is the fellow who's been doing a lot of demo-style coding for the CoCo. So I'm sure Fedor got to see some of the previews of some of that cool stuff. Simon's been doing some work on the MC10, so maybe he got a preview of that as well. I don't know. It's cool that these guys get together and can buddy up a little bit. And I know actually a couple of years ago, or no, not a couple of years ago, last year when I was in Dusseldorf, Germany, visiting for a Linux event. Simon actually drove down from Denmark and with his family and came and said hello to me. It was great fun. I got to talk CoCo in person. It was probably the only chance we'll ever get to meet in person. So try to talk Simon into getting on the plane to go to CoCo Fest, but it turns out the getting on a plane part is a bit much for Simon. Anyway, but Fedor, you could get on a plane, and that'd be all right. I'd like to have you at CoCo Fest. Wouldn't you like to have Fedor at CoCo Fest, Neil?
Definitely. And who's kidding who? I'd like to go to Denmark and hang out with those guys, too.
Well, that might be fun, too. Maybe we should just all go to Denmark. I haven't got an invitation, though.
I'm down for that.
Anyway, okay, well, everyone just meet at Simon's place. I'm sure he'll give us the address. All right. Well, anyway, moving on. Kind of a next big item. So Nick Morentis announced that he and John Kowalski, aka Sockmaster, have been working together on. Essentially, it's a software-based version of the high-res interface for the Color Computer 3. The mouse on the Color Computer, by default, it plugs into the joystick port, and the joystick port on the Color Computer is the analog signal is converted to digital by comparing it to the output of the digital to analog converter that's built into the CoCo. And the DAC on the CoCo is only 6 bits. And so by default, you only get 6 bits worth of resolution when reading from the joystick or from the mouse on the Color Computer. And 6 bits means 64 positions. And that's okay for the joystick in most games, but once you move up to a graphical user interface, like in multi-view or in some drawing programs and that sort of thing, and the high resolution modes on the CoCo 3, 64 places is not really enough. That's too coarse for the handling the positioning on the screen. So traditionally, we've had to make use of a high resolution interface. The standard one from Tandy was designed by Steve Bjork. There was, a version utilized by CoCo Max 3 from Colorware. They both work similarly, where they did their digitization, their analog to digital conversion, using an RC charging circuit, similar to how the Apple II or the IBM PC works. And that's fine, but it requires an external piece of hardware hanging off the back of your CoCo, and I guess it takes up what plugs into the serial ports. It's kind of inconvenient, especially nowadays when people are trying to use drive wire, that sort of thing. Basically built on some clever math from Sockmaster. Nick implemented some code that does some really clever sampling and is able to coax basically a lot more than the 6 bits of resolution out of that. They claiming up to 15 bits worth of resolution they have a web page up and they explain how it's done, but basically they kind of go back and forth between two samples and take kind of different they resample at different timing intervals and then kind of take a guess at the actual value based on the values they get there. And it seems to work fairly well. They can get essentially a high resolution input based off of comparison to the 6-bit DAC, combined with their clever timing and mathematical analysis. So pretty neat stuff. And I think I saw a post from Eric Gavrulik saying that he had kind of re-implemented CoCo Max as a version there that could use the new code, and he was able to do drawing with that. Anyway, it's a pretty cool technology, shall we say, for the color computer. It's one of those cool things where the code is new, but if we'd have had this code back in 1985 or 86 or whatever, we could have been doing it then. It's cool stuff. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I often think of what it would have been like back then to have that code. If the Tandy high-res pack would have even been available.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't have needed it. And like I say, here's the post from Eric. Color Max Deluxe running in VCC, easy, especially when Nick and John managed to get a CoCo emulating a high-res interface before VCC does. So he got in a little dig at the emulators there, but I think that was a shortcoming of the emulators, that they didn't emulate the high-res interface, and I guess maybe now they don't have to. So that's cool. So anyway, cool new stuff from Nick and Sock. Be sure to check it out. They have made available some code that you can use in your basic programs and machine language programs if you want. So it's a nice gift to the community. Okay, so the next item is a public service announcement / warning for RGB to VGA owners. And so this is an observation from Roger Taylor. The announcement comes from Ed Snyder. Apparently, I guess pin 9 on the RGB to VGA, I think it's wired to ground. And the VGA spec, or at least some versions of the VGA spec, specified as 5 volts. That's supposed to power a chip on the monitor to be able to identify the monitor. You've probably seen that on some PCs. They can read back from the monitor what it is and what resolutions it supports, that sort of thing. Well, apparently the spec goes on to say that once the monitor is turned on, the monitor itself is supposed to provide that power. It's not supposed to come from the adapter side. And so if you're using RGB to VGA and the monitor is driving 5 volts on that pin and the RGB to VGA card is grounding it, then theoretically, that's a short circuit, and theoretically you could Well, you could damage your monitor, you might damage your RGB to VGA card, or you might just make a wire so hot it catches on fire. So that would be bad.
Either way, you got a mess.
Yeah, so that would be a mess. So if you're using that, you at least want to be careful. You may want to check. It sounds like some VGA cables don't have pin 9 connected at all for that very reason. You may want to look into either having a cable like that, or having some sort of adapter that drops pin 9 from the connection, or whatever. Make sure that your monitor is old enough to not use that signal, or something like that. You may want to refer back to Ed for more advice on the matter, but you should be aware. If you're using RGB to VGA, you may have a problem. You may want to attend to that and check it out. Okay, so there's an MC10 composite output board prototype under test. This is from Ed Snyder, who's made a number of similar boards for the CoCo 2 models. He has sent one to Simon Jonason, who I mentioned before is doing some work with the MC10 these days. And Simon has installed it and has been working with it. And I think the output looks good so far. So now it's time to start banging on Ed to get some ports available for the rest of us. Don't you agree?
Yeah, Ed is definitely on a roll. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, well, he doesn't sleep, I guess, or I don't know. I don't know what else he's up to. I don't know what else is going on in his life, whatever. Maybe he's just having the time of his life, laying out boards and putting things together and that sort of stuff. I hope that's the case, and I hope he's loving it and not hating it.
We definitely thank him for that.
Yeah, very cool. Anyway, it's nice to have these outputs. You say the RF output is problematic to begin with, and there are more and more video displays / televisions these days that come out that don't have the appropriate inputs for the RF outputs, and there'll be even fewer in the future. So it'd be good to have all of our devices converted over. Okay, the next item is just an announcement of Floppy Days, episode 47. That's a podcast.
That's a third part that you can hear us.
Yeah, that's part 3. Well, you can't hear us in part 1. I think part 1 was actually Boise. So we're in part 2 and part 3. That is a podcast by Randy Kindig. It's the general retro computing podcast. He kind of steps through more or less in a time, following a timeline of when the machines were available, and he's up to the CoCo now. And so Neil and I, first Boise joined for part 1, talking about some of the history of the CoCo, and Neil and I joined for parts 2 and 3. I think it was just supposed to be part 2, but we talked so much that he had to split it into part 2 and 3. Anyway, it was cool being on Randy's show and seeing how he does his podcasts, and he's a friendly guy, and got a great podcast. I hope everyone will check it out if you haven't already. I'm going to introduce this next topic, and I'm going to let Neil talk about it. So Plateau of the Past is a game by our own Jim O'Keefe. Plateau of the Past sold on eBay for a total of $52, which I think is a pretty good price for a lesser-known CoCo software title. And I'm going to let Neil tell you what it is, why it's interesting, and how excited he is about it.
This Plateau of the Past game, it's from Jim O'Keefe and his buddy Chuck Yeager. They wrote it back in 1985, and it's pretty scarce. I've never seen one in the wild, and other than Jim's copy, his personal copy, he probably had from when he wrote it. So I decided to do a remake of it, redo the manual and the floppy disk, and just update a few things, like add some color to the manual, and then just resell it so people can enjoy the game.
And you had it available at CoCo Fest this year. I managed to get a copy through the no minimum bid auction. It's probably the best deal of the CoCo Fest right there.
That was the deal.
And so you were selling it on eBay, and the bidding was going a little slow. And so I took the opportunity to check out. I had my copy here. I had not actually played the game yet, but as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I've been setting up so that I can try out software on the CoCo And so I popped the disc in, played the game a bit, and I was really impressed it's basically a textile adventure, but it's implemented on a graphical screen. So you get nice font rendering, some font rendering, and you still get, of course, the artifacts in there, the red and blue. Sometimes that makes things a little hard to read, I guess, but you get some graphical senses. You get the map at the top that shows where you're going. The thing that I thought was the most interesting is that when generating your character and in the combat scenes, if you're playing an old style role playing game, when you do those things, that'd be when you'd be rolling the dice and telling the DM what you rolled. In this case, it instead of just doing that for you and just saying, "Oh, you hit, oh, you missed," or whatever, it would spin up the random numbers and wait for you to hit a key before it froze the numbers. And it really felt like you were rolling the dice. That was exciting to me. Yeah. So anyway, I wrote a little description of that, kind of a mini review on a Facebook post that Neil had done, and I guess got a couple of people excited about the game, and suddenly the bidding took off. So I know we're both excited about that. Neil, yes, especially.
And so was Jim.
I'll bet.
Yeah, he was really excited to hear that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. You know why you got a good deal on that at the auction at CoCo Fest, right?
Oh, why is that?
Because Jim wasn't in the room.
Because Jim couldn't bid me up, huh? That's pretty funny.
Yeah, he said I missed it.
Yeah, oh well. It is a cool game. Definitely excited to see. I hope whoever got the buy off of eBay there, I hope they enjoyed it as much as I have. So if you're the buyer and you enjoy the game, or if you hate the game, I'd love to hear from you either way.
Well, whether you like it or you don't, it's a nice one for your collection.
Definitely, it's good stuff. The next item comes from Boise Pete. So, Boise may have been, may have been hitting the sherry a little hard. I'm not sure. Down there in Cloud 9 Lab South. So they've been working on a little project so the CoCo 3 has a badge on the front of it, and they all say 128K color computer, whatever exactly they say. But they all say 128K. Even if you bought it brand new with the 512K upgrade, it still says 128K color computer 3. And I think this is a point of irritation for some people, has been for a long time. And so Boise and Mike Rowan have been looking at implementing a replacement badge that says 512K CoCo 3. And I guess somebody bought a CoCo 3 with a 512K upgrade from Cloud 9. And Boise must have been kind of visualizing the badge on that machine, and then forgot to swap it back out before he shipped it off. and let's see, it ended up in the hands of Lee Patterson, who posted a picture of it on eBay, and then the demands for how can we get a badge like this have commenced, and the phone lines at Cloud9 are now ringing off the hook.
Oh yeah, that thread went out of control. Tell you one thing, Lee is one lucky guy.
Yeah, how about that, huh?
He can always hold that over us. He can say, I had the first 512K badge CoCo.
Yeah, very exciting. It's a shame you can't file the serial number off and make it serial number 1 or something. So anyway, this little sneak peek. I think Boise was saying that they are going to try to get those badges out available as actual products sometime before Christmas. Hopefully they'll make it out. Kind of in a similar vein, Raymond Jett posted what appears to be a bag full of plastic feet. Feet as in what's on the bottom of your CoCo, not as in something from a mannequin or anything. Anyway, he apparently found a supplier for the plastic round black feet for keeping your CoCo off the top of the desk. And He says, picked up a few of the round feet with pegs that fit our beloved CoCos. I think he means CoCo 3s. Anyway, he says, I'll try to get them listed on my website this weekend. And that was posted a couple of days ago. It might be available on his website now. I don't know. But anyway, so if you are missing feet for your CoCos, you may have a source now.
I'm missing feet for one of my CoCos, so I'm definitely in Raymond if you hear this.
Okay, so next announcement. These last one are from just the past couple of days or whatever. Public bulletin board system that supports the TRS-80 color computer and OS 9 Level 2 from Philip Taylor. Posted to the mailing list. It looks like it's the bulletin board itself. I think is just kind of a normal. It's a web interface that you can click through. It sounds like it has a telnet-based interface as well. And he says he's going to have files available in there relevant to the color computer. I haven't really had a chance to check it out yet, but if you're interested, I think you should. So please check it out. Let us know what you think. Sounds like it could be a cool place to go to talk about the CoCo or check out some files. Okay, here's another one from Ed Snyder. He's announcing a couple of new projects. His top line project is an FPGA Gimme project. And the Gimme, of course, is the ASIC that is in the Color Computer 3. It says he's working to re-implement the Gimme as a first step. Well, he wants to be able to have something that can replace the Gimme, support up to 2 meg of RAM, and do VGA output. And he says this is going to be a step towards a future CoCo 4 project. I'm not sure we need any more CoCo 4 projects. Maybe CoCo 401 as an April Fool's kind of project. We'll see. Hopefully that's something that comes out. It would be nice to have something that can replace the Gimme chip, especially if it could do so in a way that supports 2 meg of RAM and VGA output. That'd be really cool. Anyway, Ed's been doing a lot of FPGA work recently, it seems like. And so his second project that he's kind of pre-announcing is a FPGA experimenters board. This is something that would actually plug into the cartridge port on the CoCo. Saying you'd probably have an Altera device, some bidirectional level shifters. That's probably for voltage, going between the 5 volts on the CoCo and the 3.3 or sometimes less that modern electronics sometimes are using. This is maybe an ADC chip or a couple of resistor DACs, some other support circuitry. So we'll see what else is hanging off of it. But anyway, it could be a cool project if you want something that you could plug into your CoCo and then whip up the actual design in Verilog or VHDL. This would be a cool outlet for that. So hopefully both of those projects come out, and we'll see where Ed's able to take them. Very exciting stuff. And our final news items is from Bill Pierce, and he is announcing the release of MShell version, MShell version 01.00.3e beta. MShell is describing itself as the ultimate OS 9/Nitrous 9 GUI, as in graphical user interface. I haven't looked too deeply into it. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be an enhancement to multi-view, or if it's supposed to be a replacement for multi-view. One way or another, it's a graphical user interface on top of Nitrous 9 or OS 9. Maybe it's a good outlet for that high-res joystick interface stuff that Nick and Sock have been working on. I don't know. Anyway, it looks like, it's got some cool, he's showing some file manager style stuff, some application launching, that sort of thing. And of course, shell, Windows, that sort of stuff. Anyway, if you're a Nitrous 9 user, you're looking for some graphical shell options, there's something new out there for you to check out, or at least a new version of something that's been around for a little while. All right. Well, that is the news. I'm not sure if that's our longest news segment, but it sure feels like it right now.
Radio Shack understands that a computer purchase is a serious personal and business decision. But what's really important is the company behind the computer. At Radio Shack, when you buy a computer, you buy a company. A company committed to technology, service, and support. We'll be here when you need us. With a telephone hotline, training, education, and excellent service. Tandy Computers, in business, for business. Tandy, clearly superior.
Okay, let's talk about feedback. Ed Snyder posted some reaction to our discussion last time on the topic of stealing projects. Let's see. He says, I found the discussion on competing projects very interesting. I can see how, well, let's see. I suppose it would be kind of an issue if someone were to come out with a competing project, and can see how that would be annoying. He says, I think you have to take the view that anyone should be able to do any project they want to, as long as they aren't directly copying someone else's project. It's a hobby for most of us, after all, not a business. The reason I start a project is it's something I want or want to learn about and to enjoy the technical challenge. The reason I do runs or continue to make any of these is really just so that people can get a hold of these items and to help promote an active group by sharing these projects. So that's cool. I mean, that's where I thought Ed was on the topic, and I'm glad that he confirmed that. Like we talked last time, I think it's good to have people participating in the community and doing cool stuff. And if occasionally we have some overlapping or conflicting projects, well, I think that maybe is a good problem to have in general. We had some feedback from Mike Rowan. Mike had been a little behind on the episode, so we actually had quite a bit of feedback from him, some of it from last time. His biggest point, I think, was he was really excited about the idea of registering as a fan at Cyber Ears. And so Cyber Ears has this feature where you can register as a fan of the show, and you'll get email immediately whenever we upload a new episode. And so it's pretty convenient. I think basically Mike was sending us feedback from the previous episode just as I uploaded the last episode. So almost as soon as he hit send on the one, he got email from Cyber Ears about the new one. So he's pretty excited that that he got such quick feedback or a quick update on the status of the podcast. If you're interested in being immediately up to date on the podcast, you may want to think about registering as a fan of the show at Cyber Ears as well. Next feedback item is again on the project discussion, I think. This is from Brian Blake. Says, I remember the brouhaha between Drivewire and Coconut as well. I hope it stays buried. I don't really know that two people having a similar project idea is that huge of a problem in our small group. The bigger problem is how from my view, the bigger problem is how the general idea someone has always seems to turn into a design by committee scenario. Yeah, I think we're going to have another discussion in this later in this episode, and I think we're going to cover some of that. Anyway, he said he enjoyed the project segment, and it's always good to hear from people, hear from Brian. Appreciate the feedback. It's part of why we do this is to build a community and hear from people, and it helps to make things worthwhile when you write to us. So appreciate that, Brian. We did get some feedback from Brett Gordon. Said he learned something about the CoCo's PIA setup. That was the technical segment last time on the peripheral interface adapter, the 6821. Anyway, he said, I never realized one PIA gets access faster than the other one in the dual speed mode. So another good episode. Thanks, John and Neil. Well, thanks, Brett. Glad you're enjoying it. And again, thanks for sending us some email. Okay, I got one more. This one just came in today. And this was from Roland Schweiger. Could be Schweiger. I think it's probably got a little bit of the Schweiger sound to it. Anyway, says he's from Germany. This is Rollo. I mentioned Rollo in the last episode as a dragon person who's working on a multi-ROM cartridge. He says, I personally like to use the kind of technology which is fitting to the computer and its era. And that's something I like to see too. There's a lot of people want to slap on a big extra hot processor or some other modern computing device onto their retro computer and, look at what it can do now. And I said, well, that's cool. But basically you put a modern computer in to do the things that modern computers do. And I don't know, to me, that's not as exciting as when you use old technology to do something new.
I definitely agree with that.
Rolo also says, we mentioned another dragon person in that episode, Per. Apparently this is Per Serrat from Spain. Still not sure if Per is the correct pronunciation, but if anyone who knows, I still would like to hear that, if it's Per or Pere or something like that. Being from Spain probably makes it sound less French and more Spanish, but I'm not sure which direction that actually takes it. So Roland says, thanks a lot for your show. Listen to it in my car on my way to work. He says he likes the technical segments. I like the technical segments too. So thanks, Roland, for contacting us, setting us straight on some names, and it's good to hear from you as well. Anyway, so that's a lot of feedback. We don't usually get quite that much feedback. I'm happy to have it. And thank you guys for responding, letting us know you're out there. And anyone else wants to respond, like I said, you can send us email, contact us on Facebook, or send us mail on the list, either way.
Now, if there is any dedicated group of old computer users, it is certainly the people who still love their CoCo, the Tandy Color computer.
Okay. So, given the success of last time's discussion, we thought we'd try to do another one. When I first proposed this topic, so I don't know how many people listening are aware of something called the Retro VGS. Retro VGS is a proposed project to bring out a games console based on cartridges. And so this would be a kind of a retro themed console. There's been talk of it being FPGA based with FPGA implementations of some older machines. One way or another, it was going to be a cartridge based games console. It was out on Kickstarter, and then they wanted a pretty big sum of money. It was more than $1 million. What was it, 1.2 million, something like that. In the first 10 days or whatever, I think they got maybe $60,000. They ended up pulling the plug and say that they're going to retool and try again. So the point of originally this was going to be a why do projects fail, or what kind of projects can you see that are going to be doomed for fail from the start, that sort of thing. But I don't know, I thought maybe that was a little negative and maybe we could expand the discussion a little bit more and talk more about what makes a project successful, and or what kind of things happen that sometimes doom a project to premature failure. Like I said, the Retro VGS, one issue is they were asking for a lot of money in a crowdfunding arena. Part of the problem there was they kind of had an underspecified design. It's like they were just hoping people would give them money to come up with something good without really specifying it out. Maybe that's not what they thought they were doing, but that's sort of how it came across. We mentioned CoCo X, which was the crowdfunding attempt that Gary Becker made for a CoCo 3 FPGA-based project a couple of years back. And that was sort of similar. He didn't want anywhere near as much money, but it was still a significant chunk. It was like $50,000 or something. And it may have been a reasonable amount of money to ask, but it's still a lot to ask. So those kind of things where the buy-in is too big, maybe a design is not fully specified, or people aren't sure where you're going with it. Those sort of things, you can see where those might kill a project, especially something like in the CoCo, where the community is limited to begin with. But even in, say, the larger, like in the Apple II or Commodore 64 or whatever community, some of those things might still be impractical. But even then, I mean, we see time and again, we've seen people come through. I mean, that's the typical CoCo 4 discussion we have every year or twice a year or whatever, where somebody says, well, let's come out and we're going to do one, and it's going to have a 50 megahertz processor. And so, well, it needs to have Ethernet, or it's not worth having. And somebody says, well, Ethernet, heck no, we need Bluetooth. And oh no, it's no good to have Bluetooth if you don't have USB for drive storage or whatever. And before long, you're talking about hanging a brand new PC off of something and then calling it a CoCo or whatever. And then somebody said, well, if you're going to have all that hardware on there, why don't you have just a big emulator? And then we have the discussion of whether or not an emulator is a real CoCo, along with well, why are you doing this project anyway? It's not what I want. So anyway, I was kind of just trying to open the discussion there on what makes for a successful project in our community, or in general perhaps, but especially in our community, and what sort of things are out there that you definitely want to avoid, or maybe we can all avoid doing to a project from the outside. So I talked a bit in there, so I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Neil. What do you got? What are your thoughts on this?
I think, just from reading and seeing different projects come and go over the years is what definitely affects a project is listening to too many people. Sometimes you need to have a good goal and a focus and then carry through with your own ideas. I mean, it's good to hear other people's opinions, but if you keep listening to everybody, I mean, and I think that's what also hurt the retro VGS console you mentioned, is that, people are saying, I want this, I want that. And it gets to a point where it's out of hand.
Yeah, it definitely can sink the ship when you start just adding on features or whatever. I mean, that's the traditional kind of feature creep problem people talk about in projects everywhere. And it's pretty easy to do. I mean, you kind of have to have the mindset anyway. You're coming into the community. It's very easy to come to the community and say, well, I want to do a project, but I just kind of want to do a project. I'm not that particular on what project I want to do. What do you guys want? And that's a well-intentioned kind of thought process. And unfortunately, it's one that is quite often just going to be doomed to failure just because, like you said, everybody's going to load it up and people are going to have, unrealistic expectations about what's possible, or about what the implementer can do, what their skills are, what something's going to cost. People think, well, we see all these amazing technologies that pop up, for us these days, and everybody carries around a thing in their pocket. They call it a phone that has 10 times the power of the computer that I used to graduate from college. It seems like everything should be very easy and cheap and available, and should take no time. It should just pop out with a smooth finish and beautiful documentation and whatever else. And like I said, people's expectations can be very unrealistic.
When in reality, it's not that easy.
Yeah, so that's kind of what came into my head as I was thinking there, is something you see a lot on the list, especially when you don't see it that often, just kind of as a cold call out of the blue, but sometimes when somebody starts discussing the beginnings of a project, all too often you'll get somebody come out and say something to the effect of, well, I have no idea how to write code or do any of this, and so I can't contribute at all, but it seems like it should be really easy to do this and that and the other thing. And quite often, as somebody who does know something about writing code and something about hardware, this and that and the other thing are actually the hardest things you can possibly imagine, especially to do them all together.
Exactly.
And so I guess from the outside of the project, maybe one thing we should do is maybe hold back a little bit on things that we don't really know that much about, so we don't poison the project from the beginning. Because I know there have been times when I've been on the other end, not that many. I don't really like to pre-discuss too many projects anyway, for a variety of reasons. But it can be easy to kind of suggest a possible project and then have somebody kind of basically shoot it down and say, well, it's no good unless it has this and that. And it's like, well, I don't really want to do this and that, so I guess I'm not going to do it at all because nobody wants it. And it's easy to think that. It's not a great, if you want to do a project, I think you shouldn't let yourself feel that way. I don't know. I guess that's the thing. You need to be careful in general, particularly in our group, I think sometimes if you want to talk about a project, you need to be a bit careful, or you need to be a bit thick-skinned about some of the stuff, because, like you say, you get some people who jump in and, they have a lot of helpful ideas, or ideas that they at least think are helpful. Maybe sometimes they're not that helpful. And like I said, they always prefix it with, well, I don't have any idea how to do it, but it seems like it'd be easy. And it's like, well, if you don't have any idea how to do it, it shouldn't seem anything, right? So I don't know. So I think that's one thing that is bad sometimes in the community, is we sometimes overload projects on the front end with, well, it really needs to do this, or we really think it should do that, and kind of the implied that, and if it doesn't, it's not worth doing. I think that's disheartening for people who want to do projects. But on the other hand, though, what's a good way to do a project? What's you got any thoughts there?
Well, a good way, definitely, like you said, don't advertise it too much. I think, kind of keep it to yourself a little bit. Maybe announce a few things on it. But another good thing is to, praise people, that are doing projects, and, instead of overloading them with thoughts and possibilities, just kind of coax them along.
Yeah, well, like I said, talk things up. That definitely makes sense. When people do announce or give a preview or unwittingly unveil something by shipping it to somebody who bought a 512K CoCo. Or, whatever.
For example, I can't write code. I wish I could. I do want to learn. And, whenever I see someone, writing a game or an application, I'm trying to coax them along to praise them.
Definitely encouragement is worthwhile. I mean, people should know this, right? Encourage people and give their stuff a try. Try to have some constructive feedback, that sort of stuff. Try not to load it up too much, because sometimes people are doing all they can do.
It's true. After all, this is a hobby for most people.
That's right, and I'm sure most people will be happy to refund you their money if they don't fulfill your expectations, right? So on the like say the project, as the project doer, like say I don't think you should do a lot of pre-advertising in a project before you've done it. I think you should at least start to get sort of a germ of the project in place before you start talking a lot about it, because sometimes people will give you feedback that's good and helpful and whatever, and sometimes they'll sneer at it and say, well, it's not as good as that, or boy, it really needs that. And sometimes, like you say, it depends on the person, and sometimes that can hurt a little more than you want it to when you're doing a project kind of out of love. If you are going to talk about it, at least be prepared for that, because it might happen. But yeah, you might kind of hold back until you have, kind of at least the germ of the project in place. Is something that's actually there. The main thing I think is you need to do the project. If you do a project for the CoCo community, you mostly, or in the CoCo community, you probably need to mostly do it for yourself, for your own entertainment, your own education, scratching your own itch, whatever the term is. And if it happens to be something that the community is happy about and likes, whatever, so be it. That's great. But, you kind of need to be thick-skinned enough that it doesn't really matter if they like it or not. And hopefully that's going to lead to the best projects and the kind of things people do like. But, I've done a number of projects, do a lot of them fairly publicly. I blog about them, whatever. Some of them have excited a lot of people, Farfall. Some of them have excited a few people. That's probably my VDG Tricks blog was kind of in that category. It kind of got Simon excited and back into the community. I'm not sure anybody else cares about that. But they care about what Simon's doing, so that's great for me.
Well, yeah, if you got one extra person interested, that's worth it right there.
Yeah, very exciting. There's other things I've done. I did a project that had a rotary controller interface to the CoCo. Not just a paddle, but an actual rotary spinner, can turn all the way around and keep going. I think Boise liked that project. He actually made one of his own. But other than that, nobody showed much interest. And so I haven't done much with it. I didn't pin my hopes on it or anything either. So, like I say, you win some, you lose some. Didn't really lose anything, but learned a little bit more about some stuff there. But that's the attitude you've got to have. It's like, well, I did it for my own purposes. it was fun for me. I think that's the success of the project. That's how you have a project that's successful. If it's going to be fun for you, if it's going to achieve a purpose for you, if it's going to teach something to you, that's success. And if people like it on top of it, so much the better. But what if you didn't learn anything, didn't enjoy it, and it didn't do anything for you? People liked it. Well, how much of a win would that be? Right?
Exactly.
If you are out there and having trouble or thinking about getting involved in the CoCo community as a project doer, like I say, I think your best bet is pick a project that suits you. Hopefully that works out and it draws a crowd, and that's great. And if it does, that's absolutely fabulous. And if it doesn't, well, I hope you get enough enjoyment out of it yourself to come on and to keep on doing stuff and inspire the people who are interested and maybe do the next project. But like you say, it's easy to get bogged down sometimes. Some projects don't really succeed. But if you're looking for fame and glory as your motivation for the project, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. So I don't know, and I guess that's just a handy piece of advice. Maybe some people disagree, and if you do, I would love to hear it and feedback. Send us an audio feedback. That'd be awesome. Send us an email. Whatever you want to do, send us something on Facebook.
The other thing I'd like to add in there is a quick note that could hurt people doing projects as well, is if you take on too many at once. I have seen that before, and then what happens is then nothing gets done.
Yeah, definitely. You can get that kind of vapor lock on the project where you do just a bit too much to the point where when you do hit some kind of failure, some kind of roadblock, you get a cascading failure and everything drops to the floor. So yeah, don't, and this is just normal human stuff, really. It's not even the CoCo, but don't overextend. This is a hobby. I'd love to see you do as much hobby projects as you can, especially things that entertain me or that might help me along in my own projects. Because really it is all about me.
Or any video games.
Yeah, well, if you want to, that would be great. If you could write some games that I enjoy playing, or write some music that I enjoy listening to, or video demos that I enjoy watching. Any of those things would be great projects for you all to work on. But seriously, whatever you do it for yourself, and then there is no failure, right? If you're doing it for yourself, if you decide it's not for you anymore, well, there's no failure. You just have learned something that you don't really want to do. And if you decide that it's something that you love, it doesn't matter if anybody else likes it or not. It's something that you did for your own excitement. Usually those will also be in the category where they don't require any external input. You can't ask other people for too much money because you shouldn't need other people's money to do what you want to do in most cases. Trying to get people sold on a project that you're doing, if it doesn't matter whether they're involved or not, you don't have to sell them on it. So I guess that's all it comes down to. Success doing projects in the retro world or in the CoCo world is doing the projects that entertains you, teaches you, or scratches your own itch. Final thoughts, Neil?
I think that's a wrap.
All right. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed our second host discussion. And like I said, send us some feedback, some audio feedback or a message or whatever. That would be great.
After these messages,
we'll be right back.
All right. This is John Linville, and I am back with the fifth part of our series on the CoCo architecture. This time we're going to be talking about the CoCo's cartridge port, which I think has a few key items of interest that are helpful in understanding a bit more of the CoCo's available expansion options and just sort of how it works. The CoCo cartridge port is, of course, essentially a general purpose bus expansion, which allows not only the obvious ROM packs for running programs on the CoCo, but it also enables the addition of a wide variety of hardware types, peripherals, expanded ports, any number of bits and pieces that didn't come with the standard CoCo might be added through the CoCo cartridge port. A little history, such as it is, the CoCo cartridge port actually pretty much comes straight out of the reference design that was included in the datasheet for the Motorola 6883 or SAM chip. It's relatively uninspired. It's not that much special to the overall design. Pretty workmanlike. One interesting thing, it does include a couple of pre-decoded address lines, and I just would note in a historical perspective, there was a common bus that was being used in the computers that were available sort of in the hobbyist market before the kind of appliance computers that we're used to became available. And just like the more familiar S100 bus that you would see in, say, the MSI or Altair computers, there was another standard that was generally more common for use with machines that had a Motorola processor. And why they used a different bus, I don't know. Different designers, whatever. Anyway, this other bus was now referred to as the SS50 bus. The 50, of course, refers to the fact that there were 50 pins. This bus used, I guess they're called Molex connectors, which are a little weird. So instead of what we're familiar with these days with a cartridge style or a card edge connector mounted on the motherboard, these connectors actually had pins sticking up off the motherboard, and the expansion cards had essentially receptacles for the pins, and you just push it down in there to connect them. It's sort of a weird thing. The pins are long enough that if you bumped them around much, it actually had enough leverage it could crack solder joints. While if you don't do that, I think they're fairly reliable. They have a lot of surface area for connections, and they fit pretty tightly, that sort of thing. If you're not careful, you do end up with a lot of cracked solder joints that cause intermittent problems on code. Anyway, this is a big digression from the CoCo, but the point is that I'm trying to make. There was this SS50 bus out there, and one thing that's a little weird about the machines that use the SS50 bus is that they tended to have a kind of a secondary bus on board that had 30 pins, and so it's referred to as the SS30 bus. And the difference being is that the SS50 bus, the 50 pin portion, was typically for memory cards and CPU cards, while the 30 pin portion was typically for I/O cards like serial ports and that sort of thing. And the addressing was pre-decoded on the SS30 bus, so that each slot had was sort of selected by the address that you're using. And so this kind of carries over, this thought process kind of carried over into the CoCo's cartridge port, in that we have two address selects, and one is really more for memory style expansion, and one is more for I/O style expansion. Anyway, I'll expand maybe a bit more on that later, or maybe that's already plenty. Anyway, of course, the cartridge port on the Tandy Color computer was basically just used on, well, the color computer, but then also, as I mentioned before, the Dragon machines, the Dragon 32, Dragon 64, Tano Dragon. They were built essentially from the same source design from the Motorola SAM worksheet, and so they used essentially the same, very much the same cartridge connection. So I often see this question both on the CoCo and Dragon related sites. Can you plug the ports or the cartridges in between the two machines? And the answer electrically is yes. At least, maybe there's a few that there could be something out there that does something really weird. So I apologize if you try it and something doesn't work, but definitely the signals are compatible, and you can, for example, a Farfall cart, you could plug it into a Dragon and it would work fine. Now that's because Farfall is smart enough to work both with the Dragon keyboard and the CoCo keyboard, so a lot of software won't really work per se in terms of you have to use some weird keystrokes to make it work or something like that, but just the general electrical part of will it read data out of an EEPROM or something like that, they are compatible. They're the same bus. So the only other machines that use this bus, of course, would be clones of the CoCo, particularly or what comes to mind is the machines from Brazil, particularly the CP400. One difference, though, is while the CP400 slots are electrically the same, they actually are physically different. They've shaped the plastic around them in a way that it's difficult and maybe even impossible to plug CoCo cartridges with the case on into a CP400 and vice versa. If you pull the plastic off of them, you can plug the circuit boards in and things will work fine. But so, I guess that once they cloned the CoCo and there in Brazil, they still wanted to own the cartridge expansion market. I don't know. Who knows what they were thinking back then, but that's the way it worked out. Some features of the CoCo cartridge port basically are there's some power supply pins. There's on the CoCo 1, there's actually power supply pins for both minus 12 volts and plus 12 volts, as well as plus 5 volts. On the CoCo 2 and 3, they dropped the plus and minus 12 volts, so they're just listed as no connection. There is still plus 5 volts, of course. So that's a thing that'll bite you once in a while. I think basically the only common cartridge that used a 12 volt supply was what is it called? the one where you write on the pad. I can't believe I can't think of this right now. Anyway, maybe Neil will edit this and help me out by putting in the proper name here.
That would be the XPad graphic tablet. That cartridge required the 12 volt signal. The other common cartridge that used to get me a few times that required 12 volts was the original floppy disk controller for the Color Computer 1, model 26-3022.
Anyway, not many official cartridges or common cartridges use the plus or minus 12, so as part of the cost reduction when they went to the CoCo 2 line, they just quit putting the 12 volt signals out there. One thing that does use them actually is the DAC driver board I have for my laser projector. The projector was designed by Steve Noskowitz, and the board that actually the circuit design there was also Nosko's design. But anyway, that one does use plus or minus 12. So if I want to run my laser, I either have to plug it into a CoCo 1 or the multi-packs actually will still produce plus or minus 12. So anyway, if you have a card that actually needs the plus or minus 12, you can still use the multi-pack to get that. Anyway, yeah, more than once I've been messing around and plugged my laser DAC board into a CoCo 2 and then wondered why it wouldn't work. So, very silly. Additional signals available. There are some CPU control lines there. Halt and NMI, reset. There are some more control-related signals available on the 6809, but they're primarily intended for multiprocessor systems, and so they've been left off of the cartridge expansion on the CoCo. If you need to use them, sorry, you're going to have to solder wires to the board or something, but you're not going to be able to do the multiprocessor, at least not multi-6809 processor, through the CoCo cartridge port unless you're a lot more clever than I am. There are a couple of clock signals. The 6809, of course, uses a two-phase clock. The clock signals are called E and Q. Both of them are available on the CoCo cartridge port. There are, of course, the normal what you would expect for accessing, say, a ROM cartridge. So there's data lines, address lines, and a read-write signal. There are all 16 address lines are available on the cartridge port. So something plugged into the cartridge port theoretically could appear anywhere in the 64K range of memory. So there are some systems that perhaps have a more limited range. I mean, this is actually part of the issue with the original Atari 2600 is I think they only had like 12 bits of address range on the cartridge port, so the cartridges were physically limited to 4K of RAM. Of course, clever producers figured out how to do bank switching on the 2600 to get around that, but not necessary on the CoCo, at least up to a 64K range, theoretically, addressing on the board notwithstanding. All of the signals are there on the CoCo cartridge port. I mentioned earlier that there are a couple of address select lines already pre-decoded on the board. There's one called CTS, cartridge select. That one it's designed for selecting RAM, or not RAM, but memory. And so it decodes at hexadecimal C000, and I guess it probably covers 8K by default. Maybe it's 16. Anyway, it's probably just 8. Anyway, I'd have to look that up and refer back to whatever I've said earlier. It's a little late on a Saturday night. There's also an SCS signal that's called spare select signal. That one's more for I/O, so that decodes at address FF40, which you might recognize as the normal address for floppy controller. And so that really just implies that the floppy controller was lazy about its address decoding and just used the one already available on the cartridge port. There is a line on the cartridge port called SLIN-B. I'm not sure exactly what that's supposed to mean, slot enable or something like that. Anyway, SLIN-B will decode or will disable all of the address decoding on the CoCo board. So if you have something on your cartridge that you want to replace, say one of the PIAs or maybe an EEPROM or a memory location on the CoCo, or something wild like that, you can use SLIN-B to do it. It's kind of a little weird thing to do, but it might be appropriate depending on what your card is doing. One other feature is there is a sound input on the board. It's a single line, but it's used for cartridges that generate audio. So, for example, the Sound Speech Pack generates audio on the cartridge and feeds it back into the CoCo through the cartridge port. So then the CoCo can output that audio to the RF modulator or whatever else. That pretty well covers the functionality of the cartridge port. I was considering walking through, maybe we will talk about the individual pin assignments. So the first two pins on the cartridge, the first one is negative 12 volts, rated at 100 milliamps. The next one is plus 12 volts, rated at 300 milliamps. Of course, like I said, these are only available on the CoCo 1 because the CoCo 2 just doesn't have those power supplies. Pins 3, 4, and 5 are in order, halt, NMI, and reset. Those pretty much go straight to the CPU, although the reset line actually is the system reset, so theoretically the cartridge can just reset the whole system. Okay, next is E and Q. Those are the clocks. There's a signal called CART, which is really an interrupt signal that ties back into, I think, the second PIA. It's the one that ties in, that allows you to generate the fast IRQ signal to the 6809. So theoretically, a device on the cartridge port can use the FIRQ signal to get faster processing. Oh, also there's a little trick that the auto start cartridges actually tie the clock signal into the cart. So at a certain point during the ROM startup, it will enable the fast IRQ signal, and if it triggers, then it will assume that you want to auto start the cartridge, and so it'll do a little cleanup and then just jump straight to the C000 address, which is again the cartridge memory address. Okay, the next line is plus 5 volts, followed by the next 8 lines are data lines, then the read-write signal, and then there's 13 address lines, and then there's the cartridge select signal. There's 2 ground lines. I guess they want to make sure you have a good solid ground. Sometimes electrical signals, cartridges will, or electrical interfaces will contain multiple lines with the same signals, particularly for power, so that you can carry a higher amperage of that signal. So in this case, you can ground out a higher amount of current if need be. Anyway, so the next one is the sound line, and sound. Let's see, this signal is connected directly to the sound input of the DAC chip. This is from the service manual for the Color Computer 2, particularly the 263134A and 3136A version. This signal is connected directly to the sound input of the DAC chip and allows cartridge-generated sound signals to be fed through the TV sound system. The signal should be AC coupled and should not exceed 3.9 volts peak to peak. So, if you have something that you want to generate sound and you want to plug it in the cartridge port, there's your gateway. After sound, there's the spare cartridge select. There's the 3 more address lines, A13, 14, and 15. And finally is the SLIN-B signal. There's not a lot more to say. You can do, like I said, pretty much any kind of bus expansion that you would want to do on the CoCo, you can do through the cartridge port. Pretty handy. The only downside is there's only one on the normal machines, and so you need to use a multi-pack if you're going to trick out your machine too much, or you need to build some kind of special Franken card that contains a number of devices on one card, and there certainly were a few examples of that back in the day. I hope that helps expand your understanding of the CoCo system, and appreciate you listening. I think we're probably going to have to move on to talking about the CoCo 3 the next time we meet. All right, well, so that's enough for now. Thanks.
Welcome to another edition of The Games Corner. Today I'm going to talk about a game that I'm sure we all know called Donkey Kong. But wait, this isn't just some cheesy remake or bad port. This is a real emulation from the Nintendo Donkey Kong arcade cabinet ROM. Back in 2007, a guy named John Kowalski, aka Sockmaster, surprised all of us CoCo nuts out of the blue with this magical version of Donkey Kong for the Color Computer 3. Sockmaster is known as the CoCo hacker in the CoCo community if you don't know him. He's a super talented guy who can pull off the impossible on a color computer. He has very high expectations for our beloved CoCo. The game isn't exactly an emulator because it does not emulate the CPUs of the arcade hardware. The CPU in the CoCo 3 is a 1.79 MHz 6809 Motorola processor. The CPU in the Donkey Kong arcade hardware is a 3 MHz Z80. John rewrote the Z80 code into 6809 code. The 6809 is emulating the other arcade hardware. The game program essentially doesn't know it's running on the original arcade hardware. It still reads and writes from the same I/O ports, graphics, and sound hardware. The emulation is to make sure all the correct stuff happens when imaginary hardware is accessed. Now, if this is not good enough, just a few months ago, out of the blue, John surprised all of us again with an updated version called Donkey Kong Remixed. This is very interesting as he mixed up the elements of the original game, using the familiar gameplay in new and unexpected ways. He put a new twist on some elements while mixed and matched others. There are more physics to the game. You can also select on the main menu to play the original classic arcade version. John also improved the frame rate in this version as it runs smoother and the sound quality is a bit cleaner too. Okay, all of you are probably wondering, what do I need to run this game? A 512K Color Computer 3 and joystick are required to play these games. But here's another cool thing. It will also detect if you have the upgraded Hitachi 6309 processor installed and kick it into native mode, giving you even smoother gameplay. This is not placebo, as I actually tested this by running two CoCo 3s side by side, one with the original Motorola 6809 CPU and one with the Hitachi 6309 CPU. The difference was definitely noticeable, pushing the CoCo to the maximum. Oops, I got a little stuck there. So if you've been putting off that 6309 upgrade, this will give you motivation. Cloud9 is only a click away, and they would be happy to help you out. I think it's safe to say the CoCo 3 has the best version of Donkey Kong out of all the other 8-bit computers and game consoles, as this one is almost identical gameplay to the arcade game, and it's not missing any of the levels. This is another reason why it's cool to be a CoCo user. Now, I could be wrong on this statement, and if I am, I'd love to hear feedback from you. If you get the chance, be sure to check out Sockmaster's website. He has some very interesting programs to download, such as scrolling animation demos, 3D demos, CoCo Tracker Mod Music File Player, which is one of my favorites, Twilight Terminal program that actually displays real full-color ANSI graphics, and so much more, including the Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Remix games I mentioned. I will be sure to add this website in the show notes. Oh, and in case any of you are wondering, yes, he is Canadian. Thank you, Sockmaster, for all you do in the CoCo community. Keep up the great work. Well, I hope all of you enjoyed this segment of the Games Corner. Until next month, game on, and be sure to try out Donkey Kong Remixed. Well, it's that time again. We have reached the end of episode 5. We hope you enjoyed this show. Please keep your feedback coming in, as we like to hear from you. I would like to thank my host, John Linville, for providing the CoCo Cartridge Tech segment. Yet again, another top-notch segment for the CoCo community and newcomers to the CoCo platform. We also like to thank all of you for listening. You are the most important part of this show. Again, if we didn't have you tuning in, there'd be no point in making this podcast. Stay tuned for next month's show, and in the words of Michael Rowan, long live the CoCo.